Hi, my name is Lucas Menendez, and I'm with.
Daniel Chapparo.
So, basically, Danny, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am, by all definitions, a full-blown scientist working on cardiovascular research. Right now, in my academic progress, I'm doing my PhD. So I've been doing this for about 5 years, and I've been working in this lab for about 6 years.
So, where did you come from?
I'm originally from Colombia, and I came to this country when I was 9 in 2005, and I've been here ever since.
And what made you interested in science?
Well, since I was little, I was always good at math and science, and I guess all my teachers and peers telling me that I was so good at science kind of make me like it even more. So it's kind of a positive feedback loop in that sense, where it was like people told me I was good, so I liked it more. I performed better, and then it was just all downhill from there.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also, what made you interested in the heart specifically? Because that's what you're doing research in.
Yeah. So nothing specifically other than whenever I learned about it in school. So I went to Ferguson, a local high school that had a biomedical track, and they taught us a lot about the heart. And every time we learned about it anatomy-wise, all the different chambers, I was always fascinated by it. And then by chance, while I was in my undergrad here at FIU, a professor who was teaching us transport and cardiovascular biomechanics asked me to join his lab as a volunteer and then as a PhD student. So it kind of all worked out.
Nice. So Danny, can you tell us a bit about the heart?
Yeah, of course. So we can start with
the anatomy of it.
a
Right?
little bit of basic anatomy, and then feel free to stop me and ask me questions that your viewers might want to know. So the heart is a big lump of muscle located in the middle of your chest, and it's characterized by 4 main chambers, right? So, and in your textbooks, they're usually drawn non-anatomically correct. So usually you have these 2 little sacs at the top of the heart, which are the left and right atrium, respectively, and then you have the main muscle of the heart, which is called the ventricles. So this is the part that actually beats and pushes blood throughout your body, and then these 2 sacs kind of just push blood into these 2 main chambers. And so the left and right ventricles are separated by a septum, right? So this chamber here would be the right ventricle, this is the left ventricle, and these 2 sacs are the left and right atria. Blood gets pushed into the heart through the vena cava, which would be attached to this, and then from the lungs, which would be attached to this. And then from there, it goes out into the aorta, or the pulmonary artery. And between each one of these chambers are valves. Right. So between these 2 things, there's a valve called the tricuspid valve. Between these 2 is the mitral valve. Between these 2 is the aortic valve. And between these 2 is the pulmonary valve.
And yeah, really quick, can we go back to which one's the atrium, which one's the ventricle, left and right?
Yeah, of course. So
if you want to use a different color.
Yeah, I will certainly do that. So
what causes this size difference between all these?
That's a good question. So this is the right side of the heart, and this is also connected to what's called the pulmonic circulation or pulmonary circulation. So this is the right atrium and the right ventricle. And the reason this is much smaller than this is because this only needs to pump blood to and from the lungs, which are within that same thoracic cavity. So your heart's right here, your lungs are like right here. So it doesn't need to go as far. However, the left ventricle, the left side of the heart, so this would be the left atrium and the left ventricle, this needs to pump blood all throughout your body. So from your heart to your head, to your toes, to your fingies, everywhere that there is vascularization, this needs to pump blood everywhere. So that's why this side is much, much bigger. Like most of the weight of the heart is from the left ventricle mass.
And is that more cavity? Is that more hole, or is that more muscle?
It's mostly muscle, so the cavity is like actually kind of small. So it would look something like this. And the whole thing is muscle.
There you go.
A lot of muscle, yeah.
Strong guy.
Strong heart.
So back to the valves.
Yeah, so there are 4 valves, like I said. these two on the left and these two on the right, and they're all subjected to different kinds of issues. For example, you could be born with defects at all aspects of these valves. Those are called congenital defects, things you're born with. But as you age, you can also have problems with valves. And as you can imagine, since this side pumps so much harder and so much more vigorously, these two valves here are usually the ones that get diseased with age, right? And if you don't get those things fixed, or we don't have any treatments for them, those things can lead to heart failure and ultimately death, which is one of the biggest contributors of mortality in the US and worldwide. Cardiovascular diseases is actually the most common cause of death in the United States.
Right.
And aortic valve disease, when this one in particular gets messed up and causes heart failure and death, is one of the leading causes of that as well.
Right.
So that's kind of where my project focuses on.
Now, if we could quickly just circle back to the aortic valve. Which one's the aortic valve again?
The aortic valve is a valve that sits between the left ventricle and the aorta. And this is what makes sure that the blood doesn't flow back into the heart after it's pushed out of the heart.
Right. And the aorta leads blood where?
The aorta leads blood to your entire body. So this would be called the ascending aorta. Then you have the thoracic aorta and the abdominal aorta. And then from here, you actually also have these tubes that go up the aorta that feed your carotids and your brain. So it literally goes everywhere.
Right. Like you said, from head to toe.
From head to toe. Yeah.
Right. So what are you specifically focusing on?
Right. So if we zoom in right here, we can kind of see what that valve would look like from this particular cross section. So if this is the aorta itself, the valve kind of looks like this, and each one of those are little leaflets. And if we were to look at it from here as well, it would kind of look like a circle. So this is like the ring of the aorta, and it kind of looks like a peace sign.
Or a Mercedes-Benz symbol.
Or a Mercedes-Benz symbol. So each one of these pieces of tissue opens and closes. You can imagine like this here being the closed scenario, and exactly just like that, they open and close to let blood out and prevent blood from going in. And then one more viewing angle. Let's say we were looking at one of these things like through here. You like my little eyes?
Yeah, I love the eyes.
So this thing has a very specific, what's called extracellular matrix structure. So the tissue makeup itself is very particular. So on the bottom here you have
wait, before we continue, can you describe a little bit more about the extracellular matrix?
Yeah, so I mean, this is gonna be a little bit mind-blowing for a bit of your audience, but you know in school this
was mind-blowing for me.
Yeah, you know in school how they teach you that cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems make organisms, right? So, and this was mind-blowing to me too when I learned about this. So when I thought about this back in middle school was that you just had a bunch of cells, right? So that's one cell, and a bunch of cells together, like in some sort of sheet looking thing, would end up being the tissue, right? Wrong, right? So the cells together are not necessarily the tissue, because you could also have decellularized tissue. How can you have tissue without cells if cells make up the tissue? Well, that's not necessarily what's happening. What's happening is that these cells make a scaffold. And this scaffold is what's called the extracellular matrix because it's outside of the cells. So the cells are putting down beams, the scaffolding beams of different macromolecular proteins, huge proteins that cross the multiple cells in length. So these are putting down these scaffolding proteins, right, which are mostly like collagen.
And collagen is a protein.
Collagen is a macromolecular protein, and things like elastin,
which is another protein.
Right. another macromolecular protein. And also glycosaminoglycans. Those might sound like big words, but those are literally the three components that make up every single tissue in your body. At different ratios, every single tissue in your body has some amount of collagen, elastin, and glycosaminoglycans. But that's what makes up the extracellular matrix. That's what makes up the tissue. So once you have the scaffold, you can literally remove the cells if you wanted to, and be left with this collagen, elastin, glycosaminoglycan structure, which is the tissue itself. So that's the extracellular matrix. So far, so good?
Great.
Okay. So now, the valve is composed of these 3 leaflets, and these 3 leaflets have a very particular extracellular matrix composition, which is maintained by cells. So there are cells on either side of the leaflet, which are called endothelial cells. These are in direct contact with the blood. So these are endothelial. So these will be on both sides of the valve. And then within the valve, there's what's called interstitial cells. I'm not gonna draw them all because it's gonna get messy. But every cell that is within these 2 layers is called an interstitial cell. Now, on the bottom here, there's gonna be a lot of elastin. And on the top here, there's gonna be a lot of collagen.
And this is specifically to the aortic valve, correct?
This is specifically to the aortic valve in this particular orientation. The mitral valve, well, all the valves have the same concept, but they might be flipped. So the mitral valve would have this flip because it prevents blood from going in a different direction. I don't know if that makes sense. So the aortic valve, from how we're looking at it here, needs to prevent blood from going down like this. So the elastin is on this bottom side. The mitral valve sits like this, prevents the blood from going back into the left atrium. So it opens like this. So the elastin is going to be on this side.
Makes sense.
Now, in disease, the cells in here become unhappy. Why is that? Well, it could be a myriad of different environmental factors and genetic factors. So if you have a genetic predisposition to aortic valve disease, those cells might just be naturally unhappy and they start depositing more collagen. More collagen is like you have way too much of that scaffold, and as you can imagine, instead of being this floppy piece of tissue, it becomes kind of stiff and hard to open and close. This causes stenosis or regurgitation, and that's what leads to heart failure and death. It makes it harder for the heart muscle to contract and push blood out. So what scientists in my field do is that they study these cells and how they respond to different environmental factors, and how do they proceed to make different things like collagen or calcification, which all change the mechanical properties of these tissues. My project focuses on looking at these specific cell types, but determining what different cell types there might be. So in general, these interstitial cells are usually thought of as like fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are like your skin cells that make a lot of collagen. And it makes sense because if you were to take this tissue and take out the cells and grow them in a tissue culture plastic, like a petri dish, they adopt this fibroblast skin cell like phenotype. But in the tissue, in your body, that's not the only cell type that is there. We have those fibroblasts, like I said. We also have melanocytes.
Right, a little bit bigger.
We also have neurons. We have glial cells. There are immune cells. And yeah, those are the basic ones. Yeah, there's also contractile cells, which are also kind of like, so we'll call them smooth muscle cells. There. So I want to determine how these different cells work together to maintain the extracellular matrix in the context of aortic valve disease, and in the context of bicuspid aortic valve disease, which I think is for another lecture. So far, so good?
Yeah, that's great.
Do you have any questions in particular about this stuff so far?
I think you explained this beautifully.
Yeah.
So yeah. What's something that you would recommend for any student who wants to get into this and like look more into the heart?
Talk to your professors, talk to your teachers, talk to anybody that you know is already in the field, like Lucas, for example. That's the best way. Get involved in clubs. That's probably the best way to get into it. And research. If you find a lab that does cardiovascular research, ask to volunteer. There are a myriad of different options to either get paid or volunteer without pay if you want the experience. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Danny. Thank you so much for watching.
Yeah.
And yeah,
My
we'll
pleasure.
see you next episode.
See ya.